Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Gerard.
Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven. Today, our special guest is Sarah Lahey, and she's a designer, educator, and writer. She holds bachelor's degrees in interior design, communication, and visual culture, and works as a senior lecturer teaching classes on design, technology, sustainability, and creative thinking. She has 3 children and lives on the northern beaches in Sydney, Australia. Gravity is Heartless is the first in a planned trilogy and received a gold medal in the 2021 Independent Publisher Book Awards. The book was also a finalist in the American Book Fest Award for LGBTQ and a finalist in the International Book Awards for LGBTQ. Book 2 in the series, Nostalgia is Heartless, is due for release in October 2021. So welcome, Sarah. So you sound like so busy.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a thrill to be here. Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you started writing?
Yeah, okay. Well, as you said, I'm a lecturer and I teach subjects in interior design, mostly creative thinking subjects, emerging design technologies, sustainable designs, staying away from all those sort of technical CAD subjects as best I can. So that's sort of my passion and that's what interests me really. And that translates, I think, directly into my fiction writing. I also come from a family of journalists. So that's a really natural fit. It seems to be a fairly natural process for me to be able to express myself creatively, in writing. I think, most people should have some type of creative outlet. And that's mine, really.
Your mother or father is a journalist?
My father, my stepfather. My mother was chief of staff. My first husband was a journalist. My sister's a journalist, and a lot of my friends are journalists. So, yeah, it's funny. You start off with a different career path early in life, and sometimes you just end up doing what the family's doing, even if you sort of try to avoid it.
But you didn't become a journalist.
No, I started, I was a designer and sort of, well, they're writers really. So I suppose that's a similar direction, yeah.
But what kind of things do you design?
I've been an interior designer, so doing commercial and residential, mostly residential homes. You sort of fit out small, large, all those sorts of things. My passion was always colour. So I worked as a colour consultant for several decades, and I also worked as a future prediction colour consultant. So looking at what colours and trends would be popular in 2 or 3 years' time. And I found that fascinating, thinking about how things would evolve from the present into the future. And I suppose that's why I write science fiction as well, because I do find that really interesting to see what technologies we will take up. I mean, there's so many available to us, and some of them we take up, but many we don't.
Yeah, I was going to say in Canada, there's something called a Color Research Society that my friend's part of, and I've been to a few of their lectures, and they're very serious about their colors. And it's like, I didn't realize it was such a thing until
Yeah, we love color. Love it.
Tell us a little bit about Gravity is Heartless, about the story and what motivated you to write the main characters and the settings.
Well, the main character, her name is Quinn, and she's a climate scientist, and she has invented an extremely accurate, futuristic weather predicting model. There's nothing like it on Earth. So it's able to really accurately predict weather anywhere on Earth, weeks ahead. Unfortunately, in 2050, when the novel is set, people don't want to know about it. People are over climate change. They've had enough. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to invest in it. The world, the planet is heating up. The sea levels are rising. The clouds have disappeared. So she is bereft. She's about 2 decades too late with her climate model. And she starts using it to monitor solar flares, predicting sort of space weather. And there's a climate catastrophe, and she has a near-death experience, and that sort of changes her, and she sets off on this quest to find out, what happened in this climate catastrophe. But she gets sidetracked along the way and has all these sort of little adventures. She falls in love, or perhaps that's lust that she falls into, and her journey takes her across the globe, and she ends up in a big city, a big metropolis or a mega city of over 100 million people, 100 million very hot people full of refugees. And that sort of city is juxtaposed against another city that she goes to, which is called Harmonia, and it's a climate city where it's a gated community. It's sort of described as this hanging garden of Babylon, where there's a lot of smart technologies and smart buildings, and it's a cool city, but it's only available to the elite. So you have this city that's full of millions and millions and millions of refugees and people who are very hot and struggling to survive. And then you have these sort of smaller cities where the elite can, stay cool. So I sort of envisage this premise where this cultural, economic and technological divide that exists today between people in the future would also exist happen between cool air and hot air. So, cool people look different to hot people.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, if there's ever a catastrophe and there's a rocket, like I'm sure the 1% will be on it.
Yeah.
Gonna be here. So, well, that's very cool. So now it's set in 2050. Like so how did you arrive at that date? I mean, that's not too far.
No, I wanted something that wasn't too far away, and my kids are all in their 20s. So I sort of envisaged this world where if they had children, although they're telling me they're not having children, but if they did have children, then what would the world that my grandchildren inhabit be like? So, and I do this thought experiment with my students as well when we're thinking about designing for a future world. What if you were to fall asleep now and wake up in 30 years' time? So one generation, essentially. What would the world be like? What would our cities be like? Will we be struggling with climate change? And so I wanted to address those sorts of questions in the book.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking today, like even with just washing our hands with all this antibacterial stuff, I mean, it all goes somewhere. And I think after COVID, everyone's like using all this stuff and it just goes into the oceans. Like, I don't think people think long term enough sometimes.
No, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think I first started teaching sustainable design about a decade ago, and it was always future generations' problem. And now it's become really our problem,
Okay. So, yeah, so I mean, the book does look at climate change throughout, and you talk about your opinion on global issues, I guess, through the book. And so your world building and concepts are quite well designed. Like, what kind of research did you do for this book?
Lots of research. Lots of research. I looked at lots of technologies and lots of science to sort of think about how the world in the future would look. And so that's, I think, the area that I teach, and that's where my interest lies as well, in those sorts of areas. So most of the new technologies and world building in the novel are really existing today. So they're sort of real world scenarios. So they're already in place. I think what is interesting is whether they will come to fruition. So, we have things like hoverboards today, and that was always one of those great technologies in the film Back to the Future. We would have hoverboards, and they're available today, but we haven't really taken them up. So I think, that's kind of interesting to see where will we go? What will we take up? Will we actually embrace driverless cars?
Yeah, I think with driverless cars, it seems to be a control issue. Like, I mean, I don't mind driverless cars because I really don't like driving, but I think it depends on the person, right?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think it is a control issue. You know, I sometimes think I don't really trust my laptop, you know, to my computer to behave and keep all my data safe. Am I going to trust, you know, a machine to keep me safe as well? And not be hacked and not get a virus, and, you know, that you're trusting it with your life, really.
So how long did it take you to write this book?
I probably started thinking about it in about 2016, started to sort of write a couple of years later. So it probably took me a couple of years to write it. And then, of course, getting published is, you know, the process is very long as well.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about your writing process and how you started and how you managed to finish as and like perhaps some up new writers can listen to you as to how you finish a project. I think that's probably the hardest part for people. It's easy to start, but sometimes it's hard to get the book done.
Oh, it's so true. Um, I think to be a writer, you have to write a lot and you have to read a lot as well. Um, I think it's important to write about what you know and write about what you love, and that certainly makes the process easier. And Stephen King has this wonderful phrase where he describes the writing process and the story development as a pre-existing thing. And he uses the analogy that it's like a, a dinosaur, and you're on an archaeological dig. And so you're digging up pieces of this dinosaur, and you might dig up a claw, and then you might dig up another section and a head. So, and then it's your job to sort of fit it all together. But it's pre-existing, and sometimes you find a bone that belongs to a different dinosaur and you try to fit it into your story, and that doesn't work. And I think that process works really well for me because it's all about finding the truth and keeping on track with the truth of that particular story. And when you go off track, you have to sort of ask yourself, you know, is this working? Maybe it's not working because this is not the story and this doesn't fit in. So, you know, go back and have another look and start digging for that other dinosaur piece.
So now you
Yeah.
work as well. I mean, writing, and then you wrote your book, I guess, during the weekends or in your free time.
Yes. Yeah. Early mornings. I'm a bit of an early riser. So that's right. You've got to try and find time to write all the time. You just, a couple of hours a day, you know, several times a week, if you can manage it. You just have to try and find the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
have to
tricky.
admit, like as a woman, I feel like it's such a luxury to be able to sit down and write because I have a small son, and like he's off screaming half the time until he falls asleep, and then I'm just like, okay, now I can write, and then I'm just really tired, and so it depends on the day. I try my best.
Yeah, look,
Uh,
it's so, you're so right. You know, life gets in the way, and sometimes it has to get in the way because you have to live and you have to love and you have to have a family, and you know, those things should come first. But then, you know, you have to prioritize your writing as well. So it's difficult. It's difficult.
It's funny. I was telling my husband, I was like, "Oh, I've been to these seminars where these women they write full time, but they all say their husband supports them." And he's like, "Oh, isn't that nice?" Yeah, no. I was like, "Darn it, should have married a rich husband." All those romantic movies were right?
So true. I mean, that would just be luxury, wouldn't it? Yeah. I also got myself a dog, a working dog. So she's an Australian Kelpie. And so my kids are grown now, so they don't live with me. But Australian Kelpies need a lot of exercise.
Mhm.
And she needs 2 or 3 good run walks a day at least. And so, I mean, while I was really excited to get this dog, because I've always wanted a working dog, they're really smart and they're intuitive and they're very loyal. I envisaged this dog would be sitting under my desk, you know, just keeping me
Mm,
company.
yeah.
But she's not. She's, you know, the paw on the leg constantly. Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go.
Well, at least, I think that sort of keeps you active. I think, like sometimes writing is also such a sedentary because you're sitting there and,
Yes,
it's hard, sometimes I get so stiff after a while.
yes, yes,
So it's
yes.
good to have a reminder.
Yeah.
So how did you get the book published? Like, did you try literary agents or anything like that before you?
Yes, I did. In Australia, it's a very small market, so it's very limited as to what you can do. And writing science fiction is also limited in Australia. So I looked at a few different agencies, a few different publishers. Got quite a the book was in good shape by the time I pitched it. And so I got a few offers, and then I looked at She Writes Press, and that was just a perfect fit for me. An indie publisher with a hybrid model. You get hard copy distribution through the US, access to, you know, a fabulous team, beautiful cover artwork, editing, and that was just terrific. And so the second book is published with them as well, and I couldn't be happier. I love them. They're terrific.
Well, that's good to hear. One of my friends actually signed up with them for her book as well, and she'll be starting this month. So
Oh, how exciting.
yeah. Very exciting. So what about the marketing? Like, I got in touch with you was because I saw a press release. So was that also through She Writes Press as well?
No, I've sort of did a different marketing company. So I've gone with Books Forward, whom I love. And I mean, you need to have marketing, really. I mean, there are millions of books published every year. There are thousands and thousands of books published every day.
Yeah.
So, you know, a book is a product. I mean, while it's a creative work, it's still a product, and publishing is a big, big business. And if you're serious about it, you've just got to get out there and, you know, get a publisher. I think that the industry has exploded, and it's very difficult to get noticed. So tick all those boxes. Yeah.
Yeah, I
get
think
professional help.
Yeah, like every year, over 1 million books are published, self-published, just in the US alone. Never mind traditional and all the other markets. And it's just,
that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
no. You say it's a lot of it's the marketing, how seriously you take it, because there's so many books. How does your book rise to the top compared to the others, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, and it also depends on the author. Like, you're able to speak, but I know I have some author friends that they write the book, but then they can't talk about it. So it depends on what your goals are, I guess. I think they're just happy publishing it, and that's it. So
that's very true. I think that's very true. It depends on your goals. If you just want to publish that book, then fantastic, that's done. But if you want to become a successful author, then there's a lot more to it.
yeah.
My hard work.
Oh my goodness. Now, Gravity is Heartless is the first in a planned trilogy, and then your second book's coming out in October. Are you like, do you have a process for writing a series, or did you find it difficult to think about planning 3 at a time, or?
Yeah, I always thought there would be 3. I think science fiction lends itself as a genre to series. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of work in the world building and setting up that scenario. So it makes sense to, you know, continue. Otherwise, if it's just one book, it's going to be, you know, 150,000 words. And publishers don't want 150,000 words, you know, they want 80 to 90,000 words. I think novels are probably becoming a bit shorter as well than they used to be. So, you know, making a series makes sense to have those sort of shorter novels at about 80 to 90,000 words. And that just worked for me. And I had a story arc that worked as well. So
What are people going to expect from the second book? Like, is it the same characters going into the second?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The first book finishes and leaves a lot of questions unanswered. The second book takes up the quest and answers all those questions. It is also intended to be a standalone novel, so you can just pick up the second book and jump in and read it. But it directly relates to the first book.
Now, do you have any other projects after you finish this, or are you doing anything in parallel?
Yeah, so I'm working on the third book right now. It's probably called Revenge is Heartless. So the third book in the Heartless series. And it's about a lonely, heartbroken girl living a very mundane, ordinary life on the moon. So it's about off-world habitation. It's set in the latter part of the 21st century, and it's still part of the trilogy. Some of the characters transfer over into this third novel, and it still takes up an environmental stance. So it looks at environmental ecology and the notion of ecological ethics. particularly I think about off-world habitation and the idea that, you know, planets and you know, rocks and mountains and water and those sorts of things don't have feelings. So do they deserve our protection? Do they deserve our care or moral concern? And so that's sort of a background issue, but mostly it's about sort of, you know, this girl who's heartbroken living on the moon, and some tragedy happens, and then again she has to try and sort out what happens and fix everything.
And then she does revenge, I guess.
Oh yes.
After she's finished being sad.
Yes, in a big
Okay.
way.
All right.
Someone she loves very much is assassinated, and
Ooh.
so she, yes, so
Okay.
she has to, yeah, revenge, and she will.
Okay, but
She's
we are
heartless.
going back to the first book because I believe you're going to do a reading from Gravity is Heartless for us.
I'd love to do a reading.
So tell us a little bit about what you're going to read, and then please start.
So I'm going to read from chapter 18, which is about a third of the way through the novel. And this is when the main character, Quinn, is on what we call a sort of a prison atoll. So there's the climate catastrophe has happened. Nearly 2,000 people died, and she is blamed for this catastrophe, and she's being held in isolation on a prison island or an atoll island. And there's a storm coming. So that's where we're at. It's called Now She Has Jane's DNA Inside Her, and Jane is a dodo bird that's been resurrected through gene sequencing, and Jane is named after the English primatologist Jane Goodall. So that's where we start. Okay. Okay, chapter 18. Now She Has Jane's DNA Inside Her. On the atoll, the breeze picks up. Quinn hears it squalling through the trees. The noises causes the hairs on her arms to stand on end. The birds disappear, the sky mellows, and the air turns yellow. Tig hasn't returned yet. Quinn collects her teacup, goes inside and closes the door. By mid-morning, it's a full force gale that breaks tree limbs and hauls the sand from the beach. Her shipping container home is pelted day and night, and she's trapped inside. Even opening the door is perilous. There's no sign of Tig. The supply drone doesn't arrive with her supplies, so she'll have to ration her food, a difficult task. Eating is one of the highlights of her life these days. After 8 days of constant sand and wind and no drone deliveries, Quinn is ravenous, and her shipping container resembles the home of a madwoman. She's drawn over the walls, the ceiling and the floor, distracting herself with maths calculations. But now she needs to eat. She needs food. She covers her face, crouches low, and edges her way outside into the hideous, unceasing tempest wind and sand. She crawls over the front landing, across the grass, and collects Jane from her burrow. Jane is not nesting, so the bird is her first choice. She is a solid thing, heavier than she looks, and she is also, to her detriment, docile and trusting. She doesn't struggle as Quinn grabs her. Quinn sees how her species was so easily wiped out. She lugs Jane inside. The bird is clearly grateful for the shelter, so Quinn gives her a few more minutes of life. Then she looks Jane in the eye and says, sorry, Jane, but it has to be this way. I'm starving and I'm going to eat you. I could explain how the food chain works and the hierarchy of animals. Big ones eat the smaller ones, but I think you get it. I think we all get it. So thank you for giving me your life so I can feed myself and not die here alone and destitute. Quinn manoeuvres the bird to the food prep. Then she collects the knife and cuts Jane's throat all the way through. Her left hand does it clean and quick. The knife is sharp, very sharp, and she's thankful for this. The bird flinches and her blood splatters. There's more blood than Quinn thought there would be. It sprays all over her face, it gets in her eyes, and it's warm. It's warm blood. The food prep is now a mess with Jane's dripping warm blood. Quinn holds the bird's body still until it stops jerking, and she's sure it's dead as a dodo. Then she hangs it upside down. While the blood drains, she cleans, wiping and rinsing down the walls and the floor, then wiping herself over and rinsing her eyes. Now she has Jane's DNA inside her. Quinn chops Jane into small bite-sized pieces, and again she's very thankful for that sharp knife and the willful spirit of her left hand. And then she boils them for an hour. The shipping container fills with the stench of dead dodo. It's unpleasant, but she's starving. After the meat cools, she tucks in. Jane tastes gamey, not so good, but over the following days, Quinn eats every part of her except for the bones. She puts these aside. When the foot bone is dry, it makes a good back scratcher. She also keeps a few of Jane's claws, just because they're smooth and interesting and go very well with her rock collection. There's no point wasting them. Jane's bones are riddled with cavities, calcium depletion. She had osteoporosis. She was much older than she looked, and this is some consolation. After 11 days, the sand lies quite still. The sun appears and the sky is once again relentlessly blue. The year turned while Quinn waited out the storm. It's now January 2050. She opens the door of her shipping container and stands midpoint between two worlds, the old and the new. While the intensity of the wind erupted outside, she wrote out every calculation, every formula she knew. She scrawled them over the walls, the floor, the ceiling, even the furniture of her shipping container home. The numbers kept her sane. They fused with the white noise of wind and sand and filled her dreams. Now, the outside world is still, and the inside resembles the frenzied activity of a madwoman. Quinn realizes she knows a lot of stuff. She knows a lot of science stuff. She has all the information inside her head, but she knows very little about herself, about the real world. I have no common sense. I am actually stupid, she says. During the storm, she emptied out a lot of shit, and now she has extra space. Now she is lighter. Outside, the dunes are leveled. The wind has liberated her collection of plastic styrofoam balls. They've completely vanished, taken somewhere new by the squall. She walks the foreshore, and it's littered with washed up blue bottles, piles of them, clustered along the tide lines like metallic blue lace. She picks up one of the jellyfish, carefully avoiding the long poisonous tentacles, and pops the float between her fingers as if it were a bubble. The jellyfish float determines its course, with half the colony projecting to the left and the other half to the right. For a week, the wind blew on shore and half the colony was stranded, while the other half sailed away to safety. Their destiny is not determined by choice, it's controlled by the tide and the wind, and this is a good way to live. When she returns to her shipping container, she's greeted by a gull drone. It has a food parcel and a message for her. Her case has been reviewed, and now, without further information or details, she is to be released. A transporter will collect her within the hour. Quinn is finally leaving the island, 62 days after the catastrophe on Kerguelen. Her tally, 2 days floating in the ocean, 7 days on the recovery vessel Prismatic, 53 days on the atoll. But today she is leaving. She hates them. She's going to kill both Niels and Maury, and she has assassination plans. Plan A, one shot right between the eyes. She'll be perched on a hill in the distance, with the sun behind her. Shading their eyes, they'll squint in her direction and see the lone black figure on the horizon. They'll realise their fate just as she pulls the trigger. Too late. Perfect. Plan B, a frenzied knife attack. This plan would bring a great deal of satisfaction. Tig never returned to the island. The derecho was fierce. Perhaps he couldn't get back to the atoll. Perhaps he was cast adrift in his sub without power and he drowned. Perhaps he died on his way back to her, put his life at risk for her because in the few days they spent together, somehow he truly knew her. She has an hour until the transporter arrives. She scours the foreshore looking for Tig, but there's no sign of him. She frets. What if he comes back and she's not here? How will he know if she's safe or where to find her? Well, he's resourceful. He'll have to work it out because she's not going to stay here. She's going to go home. On her way back to a shipping container home, Quinn stops by Rocky Beach to make her final cairn. Its theme is time. Her rocks must resemble the illusory nature of time. She suspects the task will outwit her, but she combs the beach anyway, hoping an extraordinary revelation will reveal itself. It doesn't. She sits on the ground, stacks a few random rocks on top of each other, then says, "I'm done." She brushes the sand from her hands and walks away. Such a stupid idea. the illusory nature of time. I'm such an idiot. The time she spent here on the atoll is hard to define in terms of hours, days and months, or past, present and future. She sees it as intervals of light and dark, sequences of order and routine, where the events of one day merged with every other. She lost track of time. It no longer flowed from past to future. It became memory and anticipation. It became emotion and experience. The nowness of every moment ceased to exist. One long, lonely afternoon, she even convinced herself she'd entered a parallel universe and become stuck, trapped somewhere in space-time, in the fields connecting space and gravity. The atoll is a chimera, and she has to find her way out, a way back to reality. She's lost track of who she is or who she once was. The transporter lands on the beach, scattering the gulls. Quinn collects her only possessions, her dignity, a self-anointed sense of righteousness, and from under her mattress, her pink diamond. She walks out the door and doesn't look back. She's finally going home. Home is Hobart, an isolated, underdeveloped and quiet place. It's the place to go when the world becomes too much and you decide to opt out. It's the place to go when you decide to leave everything behind and farm alpacas, live in a log cabin, fish trout for the rest of your days, or write that book you've always wanted to write. Then, 10 years later, the river has dried and turned to salt, the trout are gone, and the book is not finished, but you're still there and you'll never leave. Quinn was born in Hobart, a strategic move by her parents, who moved there so she would retain citizenship in a quiet and safe place at the end of the earth. Hobart was an escape destination for the pessimists and doomsayers who thought the world would one day implode. It did implode, of course. It took a decade longer than they thought, but it finally happened. The year was 2035. The planet was already struggling with the effects of climate change and a massive refugee problem. But that year, the forays into quantum computing brought down the internet, it brought down the new Internet of Things, and the global financial markets collapsed. That was the year the religious wars began. By 2030, the new Internet of Things was a massive, pervasive entity that controlled 99% of human activity. It was big tech and big data, ruled by multinational corporations, run by middle-aged men who were household names. They called them GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon. They shaped world consumption habits and they cornered cultures, undermining democracy and threatened individual liberties and creativity. Every publication ever written was scanned and uploaded. Publishing, media, music, even art, all were pirated and bootlegged until copyright became non-existent. It was an era of finality, all about traffic, all about shifting and selling free content and personal data. Providers monitored all devices and communications and then sold the data. Personal surveillance went crazy, and every search, every movement, every click was monitored until individual liberties became non-existent. The Internet of Things was a mess. It was at breaking point. But that was not the end, because the end was ransomware. The malicious software wreaked havoc on corporations and individuals. In 2033, a personal 3D printer took down half a continent. It became impossible to go online without risking your identity, your coin, or your data. Impossible unless you were wealthy and willing to pay the enormous fees set by security services to keep your corner of the world safe. And then even then, you were not long for safe. At the same time, quantum computing at the anatomic and subatomic level of the universe, where particles like electrons and protons are in multiple states performing multiple tasks and permeations at the one time, promised to break down a barrier between humanity and technology. It offered enormous potential in the information access arena, and it promised security. It was going to be a way out of this mess until it crashed. In 2035, an entangled pair of light protons were separated, one kept on Earth and the other sent to the moon. Despite the distance, the entangled protons stayed true to each other. The first foray into quantum computing from space was so successful that few people envisaged the destruction that soon ensured. Math is beautiful and prime numbers might be sublime, but the mass release of the first quantum computing sent an expanding algorithm into the universe that ate the internet for breakfast. It searched for databases and broke all encryptions. Social media, emails, messages, stored data, images, everything collapsed and vanished, along with the platforms and providers who'd created them. People wept in the streets. They cried in their homes and offices. Everything was gone. Everything. Their data was corrupted. The AI algorithm had distorted, morphed into a second and third generation and smashed the fail-safe blockchains. This was sweet justice for the surveillance paranoid people of the world who have fervently pushed the notion for privacy for decades. They, of course, had prepared themselves for the crash. The rest of the world thought disengaging from the internet guaranteed them safety. But the moment they opened and logged into any device, they lost everything. Backups disintegrated. The destruction was compared to the effects wreaked by a nuclear bomb. Entanglement worked, but people weren't ready for mass quantum computing. A year after the internet went down, the global economy collapsed, jobs were scarce, education was expensive, technology had ceased to offer the divertive pastime it once had, and surveillance was pervasive. Through all this, sea levels kept rising, people kept losing their homes, and millions of refugees roamed the planet in search of a place to live. In this uncertain, faltering environment, religion galvanized and emerged rejuvenated. It tapped into the deep-seated anger and aggression of the masses. It questioned the status quo of the economic world, and it morphed into fundamentalism. Fundamentalism works when people are adrift and vulnerable. And the underlying central issue of the religious wars was the pursuit of power. Destructive technologies emerged under the guise of protecting traditional values, protecting family, protecting culture, protecting the patriarchy, protecting the status quo. The economy collapsed, the Internet of Things collapsed, and 8 years of bloody war ensued. Out of this debris rose Empower, the tech giant that released the global population from centralized data storage, offering the masses user-controlled platforms. Now, in 2050, NIOTA is split into separate factions. One, local, provides access to information, another is used for general communication, and private data is accessed through a separate interface. The deep, dark places on the internet still exist. There is a place called the spinner net, a spider's web, an intricate woven trap. It's a place to hide things and a place to do dark deeds. If you get caught in the spinner net, it can take years to untangle your data. Many predicted the economic collapse and projected the imminent outbreak of war. Some of these people were artists and musicians, the avant-garde, the pacifists. Others were tech types and CEOs with massive coin who could afford to relocate. And so, throughout the re-wars, Hobart was isolated enough to remain prosperous and safe. Quinn lived there all her life. She knows little else. Her home is a small elite suburb called Styx, built close to the city. It's a machine-made homage to work and tech. She's a property owner. She bought a pod in a safe plan zone, an exclusive community. It's an unmemorable place, a non-place. The buildings are square and clean, and the area is organised around central work hubs, surrounded by residential zones, linked by speedways, so getting to work is fast and efficient. The demographic is a mix of young, ambitious and smart tech types with plenty of coin. Quinn's mother, Liz, hates it. She hates everything about the place. Property ownership, she told Quinn more than once, represents the plutonic overindulgence of the upper class. It's a receptacle of privilege for the wealthy and a cesspit of despair for the not so fortunate. She lives in Hobart. She saw the beauty of the city and the people who lived there. She didn't care that it had changed over the decades and it's now louder and dirtier. She liked it that way. She said each area was unique. The streetscapes were varied. There was art and culture and things to do. She said the city is about people, and she quite likes people. "150 years ago, There were 5 billion passenger pigeons on Earth, but they were continually hunted for meat and feathers. By the end of the 1800s, there were 14 left, and the last one, Martha, died in 2014. Martha, too, is a stunning creature. She is larger than a gull and has striking ochre-coloured streaks covering her breast. She was gene sequenced from the original Martha's DNA, and further enhancements were added to her genetic code. She has remarkable sight and exceptional sonar ability, and she follows Tig. For 11 days, the retro whipped up the oceans, and Tig's mini-sub, Nanny, was sent adrift. At the mercy of the sea and without power, the storm swept the sub north into the Arabian Sea. After the wind settled, it took Martha 2 days to find Tig. Then it took Plank another 3 days to steer Nancy in Tig's direction and fish him out of the ocean. It's been 2 weeks since then, and now Tig is back on Nancy. Currently, he's despondently unpacking the faulty hydro panels from the sub. Plank places backwards and forwards across the deck of the boat. Z is on the comms, and Z nods his head, intently listening to the caller. When it ends, he returns to Tig. Mame sends us back to Eunice. The election is next week. It's a political nightmare, and they're worried about a rebellion. They need soldiers. It's time to go off your meds, just until the election is finalised. First, we need to get back to Quinn. We'll pick her up then. She's gone. They've already picked her up. Fuck, where? She was sent back home to Hobart. She'll be safe. She'll understand. Trust me, she ain't gonna understand. Why? What happened? Tig stacks the faulty cells, packing them back into crates, and hands the boxes back to Plank. Well, we kind of had sex. You kind of had sex? Are you serious? So you told her? You told her about what happened? Tig holds a cell in each hand. No, not really. Not much time for that. Not much time for that? Not much time? It's funny, isn't it? Considering where we've come from. Not much time. No, it's not funny. No, it's not. It's kind of ironic. So you didn't explain. You didn't say anything. No. Do you think maybe you should have? Yes, of course I do. But it just sort of happened. He drops his head back, breathless. She just wanted to do it. Oh, I see. So we did. We did it all night, and it was great.
Oh, is that how we're ending things?
That's how we're ending.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for
Okay.
coming on to our show. So, where can we find you? You have a website, right?
Yes, I do. sarahlahey.com.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll post it at the bottom of the podcast so people can click and visit your website and see all your wonderful books.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Okay. So bye-bye until next time.
Bye. Thank you.
For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarrard.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there's bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.